Matt, here we are. How
Well, I'm
fun is this?
super, super grateful for this opportunity. Just knowing the work that you put out into the world. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, can you see the goosebumps? Like, I'm not kidding. I literally have goosebumps right now. I'm so grateful for this. So grateful for you. And yeah, I'm just so excited to be here. Let's do it.
Well, this is really cool. So we know each other from kind of a different part of life, and then it's always cool when two different aspects of your life overlap, and you're like, wait a minute, I need to get you on my podcast. So, and you have a podcast, which we'll talk about. I always love when I do a podcast episode with a podcaster because it's so much easier. It's like I don't need to give you any instructions. Like, "Do this, don't do this." So
Yeah,
welcome. Welcome to Hopestream.
I'm super grateful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to have you on because as we were getting to know each other, you mentioned this little tidbit that I find interesting that sometimes people will throw in when I'm talking with them of like, "Oh, yeah, there was this time in my life where I really struggled with fill in the blank." It could be
Mhm.
anything. And that happened when we were talking. So I was like, "Hey, will you come share some insights with our parents?" Because I will tell you what, as a parent, when you're watching your child, and when I say child, that could be 13 or that could be 27, doesn't
Mm.
matter. They're always your baby. Even if they're 27, they're still your baby. It's so confounding. It's just, not that we are perfect by any means as parents, but you're looking at this behavior that actually we were just talking about, and you're scratching your head and you're like, what are you doing? This doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. So, let's see. Where should we start? Maybe give us the Matt 101 today. Tell us like a little bit about you, and then we'll hop in a time machine. We'll go back a little bit. That
Yeah,
work?
100%. So starting with today, present moment, Matt.
Sure.
Well, what a different person than the person that we're probably gonna get to in a little bit. Um, yeah, today I am an individual that is deeply committed to not passing on the crap that I've experienced in my life, right? Not I do not want and granted, one thing that I had to learn, and this is really important, right? It's just I had to learn that parents aren't perfect and parents are also human. And I think for a good portion of my life, I did not believe that. But when it comes to me reproducing and stepping into that role, like I am so deeply committed today, Brenda. Like I refuse to not do the work. And I understand that things will seep through because, as you mentioned, parents and perfection are not a thing, but I am someone that is doing the unconventional turning inward as a male. I am someone that is so deeply committed to feeling feelings and talking about it and promoting all of that and the whole kit and caboodle because where I've came from was the absolute complete opposite, which I'm sure we're going to dive into a whole bunch here today.
Yes. That's really interesting that you got to a point where you're
Mhm.
like, "You know what? This is not probably the way that the people that I grew up with are," especially as a guy, right? I think maybe as women, we get a little bit more of a hall pass on the feelings thing, um, and so to be so you're not just like, "Yeah, I do this." Like, you are out there with, "I'm doing the work. I'm seeing a therapist. I'm okay talking about this stuff." How did you get to that point?
Simply too much pain, like
Mm,
literally too much pain. In 2020, 2020 was a year of transformation for many people. For me, I was in a relationship and there's no shame on this person whatsoever, but truth be told, I just did not know that I was being mistreated. And in the relationship, I would show up and I would just constantly be anxious. And I don't know what literally came over me and said, Matt, you're going to therapy, but that was the decision. So my parents were divorced when I was in probably like the fifth grade or so. And I went to therapy at that point, but, Brenda, I'm being honest, like, I would go and I would, like, count the books on the guy's bookshelf and, like, not listen to him.
yeah,
Like, just keeping it real, I was so bored.
yeah.
It was beneficial to me that he was hard of seeing, he could not see, so I would just be goofing off for the 45 minutes I was in there, but in 2020, I really just had that wake up moment of like, dude, like you can't do this. And as I put myself in therapy and started to explore it, and in fact, I was in complete denial of what my therapist was telling me. She's like, you're being mistreated, all these things, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, like I'm not. And I kept showing up in that relationship, kept getting hurt, kept showing up. And then, like I said, just too much pain. And then over the course of that, inward journey, I realized like, wow, like my shoulders feel lighter. I could drop my shoulders. Like I feel less tense. Like I feel less anxious. I feel more aware. I feel more conscious. I'm like realizing things that are true and, just like major, major breakthroughs. And it made me want to continue pursuing that. And in the pursuit of that as well, I was like, you know what? Like I need to be sharing about this. Like if it's doing this for me, what could it do for other people too? And just like having a big heart and someone that is an emotional guy, like I want to see other people change for the better, and I couldn't just be the guy that was doing it for himself and not sharing it.
Yeah. The when you started that work and the people around you were observing you doing the work, what
Mhm.
was that response? And I'm just curious from a guy standpoint because, I think as women it's different. We're like, "Oh, that's so great. You're going to
Yeah.
a therapist," right? Like what was the response that you got as a young, like you're a young cool guy in New York, right? You're
Am
the
I cool?
guy.
Am I cool?
I
Thank
think they're cool. Now that's coming from a middle-aged woman, so I don't know how much weight that carries, but, you're the guy, so what was the response to that, like, from your friends and your family?
Two sides of the coin. Family could give a crap less, right? I'm very black sheep, like super, super, and I embrace it now. I'm just keeping it real. Like I realize that that's a strength more than anything. Does it hurt to know, like in this lifetime, I probably, no matter how much I try, might not have the best relationships with them. For example, I'm 32. Like I hugged my mother last week, and she was like, "What do you want?" Like kind of, that was her reaction. So I'm cool with that. From a family perspective, there really was no reaction to it. Maybe there's a silent reaction that I just don't know about, but there was no verbal communication of like, oh, wow, you're doing something good for yourself. In fact, I actually invited a particular party to join me to try and mend the relationship I have with them. Not that we have a bad relationship, but I think it could be better. And I was kind of denied. And then from the friend side of things, it's really a two-sided coin. I have friends who were like, Matt, I really appreciate you doing this and spearheading this because it made me feel more comfortable to do it for myself,
Mhm.
which was obviously like really nice. And then on the flip side, there's probably people that see a video of mine or like hear me talk about it on a podcast or whatever, and they tell me I'm gay. And it's like, there's two sides to that coin, but at the end of the day, like I know what it's doing for me, and whether you think I'm weird for doing it or whether you're like super embracing of it and it's like, wow, like, yeah, I want to give that a shot too. It's not going to change whether I do it or not because I love it. And the fact that I am still continuously learning, like, I can't even tell you, like, I'm still learning so much. And the fact that I know, like, it's never ending, like, I am so committed, like, so committed.
You're in.
I'm there.
You're sold. You're sold on the self-introspection thing. Are there people that, because this is what I've experienced in what I went through, like, I was forced to grow a lot,
Mm,
right? For the sake, like, if I wanted to keep the relationship with my son in particular, but everybody in my family, but I had to I was like, "Whoa, if I wanna keep this relationship, I'm gonna have to do some work." And as I've been forced to do that work, I'm like you, like, I'm all in. I think it's amazing to learn more about yourself.
yeah.
But there are also people in your orbit who haven't done the work, aren't willing to do the work, and that can be difficult, right? The relationship can be really hard, and people might say like, "Oh, you think you're so enlightened," or whatever, right? Like, "You're all woo woo now, like, you've done
Yeah.
this work." Do you experience that where there's some people that are like, I don't really know what Matt's up to."
Yep. I mean, the most recent woman I was dating consistently called me woo woo. And I was just like, you know what? Like, to an extent, it hurts when it comes from someone that's close to you. And it's like, it only reinforces what you felt for so long, especially as a black sheep, where it's like you just feel even more isolated. And I think I posted a video about this yesterday. It's like when you go through your own healing journey and you really, I'm loose with the words healing journey, but like when you turn inward and you start to become aware of your wounds, it's really hard not to see someone else's. Like, especially when you see someone else's that inflicted wounds upon you intentionally or not. Like when it comes from like a parent perspective, like a kid looking at a parent, like I see my dads, I see my moms, and I'm like, I would really love to help you, but you have to embrace the fact that not everyone is destined to change in this lifetime, especially on that level. And then furthermore, you can't change anyone even if they were, right? So that's been one of the things that I've really had to embrace because like just conditioning, conditioning's a real SOB sometimes, but yeah, it is isolating to an extent. It is like slightly you feel the judgment of, "Oh, you're woo-woo," or whatever. Like, I definitely feel that, especially when it comes from the people closest, but, um, yeah, it's been a that I think is, like, the challenge of, like, not trying to change someone else, and I've definitely got caught up in that.
Oh, yes. Well, it's a it's a common trap. It's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, but if I could just tell them this, or if they could
exactly.
just understand that, then it would all be better." You mentioned black sheep a couple times. What is tell us some of the meaning behind that. Like, what does that mean in your family?
Yeah, I mean, to me, a black sheep is just someone that is isolated even when you're in close proximity to people, right?
Mm,
So, like, you can be physically close, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually isolated. And that is a really difficult concept to handle. For example, growing up, family parties, holidays, it's like, oh, this big time to get together in an Italian European family or whatever. And you're together, but the black sheep doesn't feel together. The black
mm.
sheep actually feels so isolated. And like I said, even in the midst of just like being close to people, you still feel that. So physical proximity doesn't equate to emotional, um spiritual proximity. It's honestly the opposite. And that's exactly what it was for me. Just like growing up, I just felt like I wasn't understood. And of course I didn't know this at the time, right? Like I did
Right.
not know this at all. I felt like I wasn't understood. I felt like I was neglected. I felt like I was isolated. I just felt all of the things that made me feel outcasted. It wasn't until that I made my friends my family to an extent where I actually started to feel seen, where I actually started to feel valued, where I actually started to feel like the things that humans should feel, or could feel. But yeah, it's really just like a person that is they're black and everyone else around them is big, fluffy, and gray or white. And it's like, whoa, I'm so different, you know?
Yeah. How did you so that was obviously something that you were feeling you were growing up, and like you said, you don't always know that at the time, knowing like, "Oh, wait a minute, I think I am different."
Yeah. Well, I could tell you it started with me acting out to get attention because I felt so isolated, so neglected, so just like pushed away. It started with me getting attention negatively, right? Because you can receive attention negatively. I remember vividly being in fourth grade. I was in fourth grade in 2001, and the principal, Margaret Baxter, called me into her office at the end of the day. And I was so upset because I went to a private school. We got out at 2:30, and it's like, you're calling me in right as we're about to get dismissed, and I just wanna get home, woman, and she looked at me and she goes, "Why do you do this to your mother?" And
Oh.
if I had the opportunity to just be there with the younger version of Matt, and if it was just to say, "Hey, it's because I really want her attention," like, that was the answer. So, truthfully, like, it started to show up in my life as seeking attention negatively, and that really took place in all facets of life, and it mostly impacted my education because that's where, I knew I would be able to get the attention, right? So, principal's office nonstop, really poor grades, like, that's a way to get someone's attention, like,
Oh,
fail
yes.
failing is one hell of a way to get someone's attention. And that just continued to transpire until it, like, unraveled into bigger things and honestly more serious things. Like, I didn't get accepted into any high schools, not because I was dumb, but because I simply just never applied myself. And then when I was in high school, I ended up getting kicked out of 2 of them. Again, not because I was dumb, but because I was constantly seeking the attention of disciplinary things, right? Like I would act out in so many different ways. It led to me getting arrested, right? Like I think all of it stems from what we're discussing here, and it started with attention seeking from, behavior in elementary school all the way up to the more serious stuff that I just alluded to.
Do you think that it was, um, like, this is one of those crucial, like, I wanna stick a pin in it because did you realize at the time, like, what is going through your mind? Like, "I just don't care. Like, I'm doing all these things. I'm failing. I'm not applying myself. I'm taking these risk doing these risky things, and I just don't care."
Yeah.
Or are you just kind of oblivious to why you're doing these things? I think this is such an important thing for parents to understand, like, what is going through your mind.
I was absolutely oblivious.
Okay.
Like, so oblivious. I was so oblivious that I didn't care though, right? Like, so, I maintained this bulletproof mentality that nothing could hurt me, and at the end of the day, nothing actually did hurt me. Granted, I was in pain, so I don't mean emotional hurt, but, like, I can't believe I survived a lot of the stuff that I did,
Right.
and I'm just like, "Whoa." Um, I've my most recent partner was like, "Matt, I cannot believe that you tell me these stories. It's like you live 2 different lives." And when I hear myself say some of the stories, I'm like, "Yeah, I definitely did," because I would not do half the stuff I previously did, So I was just like, first of all, I wasn't aware of why I was doing any of this stuff, so I think that plays into, like, the oblivion aspect of it, but at the same time, I just didn't care because perfect example, I went to private school my entire life up until college. My parents were paying for it. I was not going to get left back, and I knew that. Like, I was very well aware no one that I've seen got left back, and you pay, you play. You pay, you play. You just keep going and going and going. So to me, that was an open invitation to just be, like, pushed along, you know,
Mm,
and it led me to that not care mentality. Um, but there was a fair share of both, like, totally oblivious to what I was actually doing, totally, like, not giving a crap either.
right. But you weren't intentionally being oblivious, I guess is the difference because there can be, like, I am aware that I am being risky and da, 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 and I just don't care. It
Yeah,
sounds like you were a little bit more on the side of, like, I'm doing all these things. I don't exactly know why. Were you observing around you like, "Oh, there are people who are not doing these things and not getting in trouble." Like, what was that like?
yeah, well, at the time, I was surrounded by people doing the same thing, just not getting in trouble for it. I was
Mm,
the one, like, I would be the one that would always take it to the next level. Like, I would always go a little bit too far, and then you're getting expelled from school, or you're getting suspended, or you have Saturday detention. Who the hell likes Saturday detention? I sure as
right.
like, you're doing all of these things, and yeah, like, I was surrounded by it was cool, like, that's what I thought. I was like, "Oh, it's cool. Like, this is how I'm gonna
Mm,
make my mark. Like, I'm gonna be cool by doing this." And especially, like, when you're transferring schools and whatnot, it's like, you wanna fit in, and, like, to fit in, you wanna make people laugh, and, like, I got caught up in that. So it was an unintentional obliviousness, right? It was
yeah.
just like, yeah, like, I was just like, no clue what was happening whatsoever.
Which I think is very common. I think
Yeah,
it would be unusual for a person like it in the high school age range to
yeah,
be aware, right? And sort of in tune enough with themselves to be like, "Oh, I think I'm doing these things to get attention that I'm not getting otherwise,"
yeah.
it would be a little bit unusual. What was going on with your parent relationship during this time? Like, were your parents holding boundaries or allowing you to feel the consequences of what you were doing, or what was that dynamic like?
I have never been punished once in my life,
Mm,
never once.
interesting.
I think, Yeah, I can't speak from their experience, but now that I'm at an age where my friends are starting to have kids, I can probably make the radical assumption that it was so overwhelming handling a child like me that it was just like, "You know what? Just do whatever you wanna do."
Right.
You know? I was forced to grow up rather quickly because of my parents' divorce. Like, there was a part of me that actually, like, took on a little bit of a parental role for my younger sister in regards to, like, I would get out of school at 12:30 in elementary school on Wednesdays, and I would have to pick her up and, like, transport her on public transportation, and I'm in, like, 6th grade. Now, granted, I'm not, like, going super far, but,
Yeah.
like, I was, like, forced to, like, be a caretaker in those moments, and it really pulled me away from, like, being a kid. Um, so, yeah, there was, like, really poor relationships where my relationship with my dad was primarily around sports. Like, everything was sport, sport, sport. There was no connection, like, on an emotional level. I was never taught, like, and again, this is not to shame parents, and I really
No,
that
no.
message, like, I'm just telling the story. Like, I never even had a conversation with my dad about, like, sex. Like, I had to figure it all out on my own. And again, I feel like that was kind of like the underlying theme again, black sheep, right? Just like carving your own path. And funny enough, usually when you carve your own path as a black sheep, the herd ends up following you, which now happens in adulthood. But and then on the flip side with my mom, she such an incredible woman, super hard worker, as is my dad, and I always felt like there was, like, a resentment toward me from her, whether that be because she looks at me and sees my dad or because I messed around so much, there was, like, a really big disconnect, and there still is, it's gotten better as I've healed my side of things, but there was a total disconnect, and like I said, there were 0 boundaries whatsoever. In fact, no boundaries, like, "Go live, be free," you know?
Wow, so interesting, right? 'Cause I think that's you hear both, like, my parents tried to control everything that I did, and I was always getting in trouble, or you often hear the opposite, which is like, I don't know, I was just out there wild, feral in the streets,
Oh my
right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, man. There at some point, I know marijuana entered your life, and I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of misperception among parents that, well, it's just weed. Like, I don't know, we did weed in the 80s or the 90s. Um, and and I try to shout it from the mountaintop that the weed of today is very different than the weed of the past. So
yeah.
there's a big need to pay attention because there is a perception that it can't be addictive. It's not really that bad. It's like this natural thing. To whatever degree you're comfortable, tell us about your relationship with marijuana.
Well, I'll tell you this, I'm scared of it now. Uh,
Yeah.
like, I mean, you walk the streets of New York and it just, like, reeks of weed, and I'm like, "Oh, I don't wanna get high, I don't wanna get high."
It's
Um,
so bad there. I mean, I live in Seattle, and I thought it was bad here.
yeah.
It is way worse there.
Yeah, we have it's so I mean, hey, like, you can go into a deli or a bodega, whatever you wanna call it, and you can buy it right there, you know? Much different than when I was dabbling with it. It is very different. Um, but yeah, I think marijuana got introduced into my life probably, I want to say, when I was in college. Um I, like, tried to smoke twice in high school and didn't get high, and I literally, like, hit up the dealer, and I'm like, "Dude, like, I didn't
You
get high."
selling me?
Well, he was like, "How was it?" I was like, "Well, I didn't get high," and he was like, "You trying to shit on my weed?" And I'm like, "No, dude, like, no, like, I'm not, like, talking bad about your product. I just, maybe I don't know how to use it." Which I didn't. I think I was scared at the time. And of course,
Does it
like,
come with a manual, like instructions?
I could have used one. I
What
had
am
no
I
clue
doing?
that I needed to, like, inhale it. Uh I was, like, smoking it like a cigar, didn't do anything. But, throughout that period of time, like high school, I started drinking and, just, like, being a kid that didn't know what I was doing, like, I played baseball I thought I was gonna play Division I baseball before an injury, and, like, I would show up to my freshman year of high school baseball practices with, like, a 24 ounce of Coors. Like, just to be cool, like, that was my intention, like, I wasn't, like at that point, like, I wasn't really trying to hide from something, I was just trying to, like, get a little bit more attention. Um, it was so silly at the time. But getting back to the weed stuff, I think in college is when I actually got high for the first time. And, it was really a social thing. And I was like, oh, wow, that felt really good until it was no longer a social thing. And it became like, hey, you can't do anything without being high thing. It wasn't until I had a series of, like, physical experiences that made me stop, but let's just say that was probably, I don't know, from 2011 to probably 2016. Like, if I could have the money back that I spent on that, like, let me know because,
Right.
that was a lot of money being
A lot
invested.
of money.
But yeah, that's a journey for sure. It was not good.
And you didn't I'm guessing that it happens over time, right? Like, you start out it's like with anything, starts out, it's a great thing, whether it's just to party or to relax, and then you start to realize, like, what were the things that were happening that made you go, maybe this isn't such a good idea."
Yeah. So, what the thing is, when I first started smoking and actually getting high, I didn't know how to roll. So, I was dependent on my friends that did, right? I wasn't, like, holding a bong or, like, a pipe or any like, we would roll up in a J or, like a Dutch is what they called them back then. I don't know what the kids call them these days, but, I was very reliant on them for that
Mhm.
until I learned and taught myself how to roll. And then once I learned and taught myself how to roll, I was able to do it whenever I wanted to do it. And it really got to a point where, like, I'm not kidding, Brenda, like, I would smoke to go smoke. For
Wow.
example, like, I would get in my car, I'm meeting up with a friend that's 10 minutes away, and I would be smoking the entire way while driving to get to where he was, and then together we would smoke. Like, it was to that point, and then it all ended when I was in a car accident. I was coming home from college, which I showed up to college every day smelling like weed, in a suit, by the way, because I wore a suit to college.
Okay,
And I
that's a whole 'nother story.
and I was on Dean's List honors, by the way. I was on my way home from school, doing what I do best at the time, smoking while driving. As I'm getting on the highway, I get rear-ended, and, your adrenaline's pumping, I'm high, plus I was just smoking while driving, not trying to get in trouble, and I just so happened to get rear-ended by a lawyer. He was obviously very apologetic, but in the heat of the moment, young kid, I'm, like, in my 20s, whatever, and I'm just trying to hide the fact that I'm high. I'm, like, spritzing myself with cologne, like, doing the whole 9. Get home, all of the adrenaline fades, the high fades, and I just start crying. And I'm, like, calling my mom. I'm like, "Hey, I'm in so much pain. My neck was killing me." I'm like, "What do I do?" Went to urgent care. They couldn't do anything because I didn't have a police report. So I waited like a week, went back to the doctor, just lied about what happened. And I was like, "Hey, I'm in pain, like, need help." They gave me muscle relaxers. There was, like, nothing wrong with my neck. They were just like, "Hey, it's gonna get better." Gave me muscle relaxers, gave me, like, a strong ibuprofen, and I was off, like, the next few days, and I remember vividly, I'm on the muscle relaxer and on the ibuprofen. I'm in bed the entire day just relaxing, reading Think and Grow Rich, being a good little boy, just reading a book in bed, and I remember my mom got home at the time, my sister was home, and it was, like, kind of close to dinner, and I'm like, "You know what? I haven't smoked all day. Let me just go out into the backyard and, like, light up a J." And I did, and I got high, like, super quick, and I didn't realize that it was because of the muscle relaxer. So I got high, like, super, super quick, and all of a sudden, I, like, go up to my bedroom, and my heart is racing, like, really, really fast. Like, I'm, like, feeling a bodily reaction even talking about it right now, like, to the point where if my heart rate was, like, monitored by a health professional, like, they would probably, like, have taken me somewhere, like, emergency-wise. Um, it continued for the entire night, literally the entire night. I remember expressing the fear to my mom. I'm like, "Hey, this is what I did. I'm really scared right now." I was just, like, breaking down to her crying, and the next day I woke up, I don't even remember falling asleep, but I woke up the next day. I was on my living room couch or my mother's living room couch. As I woke up, I realized that I was going into a panic attack. I did not know what a panic attack was at the time, got out of it, went back into it, just like the entire day was in a panic attack. And my dad got home from work. Keep in mind, my parents are divorced. And I'm like, "Dad, like, I need to do something." So he took me to the hospital. Again, I'm, a kid. I really don't know how to handle a panic attack at this point. I don't even know what it is. Go to the hospital. They try to do an EKG on me. They couldn't even get the things to stick to my chest because I'm just like sweating and like shaking and like all of these things. And I'm laying there. The doctor comes up to me. She's like, "What did you do?" And I said, "Well, I smoked a joint while on a muscle relaxer." And she looked at me and she goes, "So what?" And I was like, "Is it not as bad as it feels right now?" Because like I'm like tripping out. I was like, my heart rate was crazy, like all these things. She's like, "So what?" So they come, they give me like a little pill. I don't even know what it is to this day. Probably like a Xanax or something, right? I take it and I'm fine. And I have never smoked weed since then. So, like, that was my absolute wake up, and I was like, "I am way too scared to ever go down that path and experience that." I rarely even drink to this day, like, very, very rare, but that was the moment that, like, shocked me out of that phase of my life, and to me, that was my version of, like, a rock bottom because I'm not kidding, like, my heart rate was probably, like, tipping 200, if that's even
Oh,
possible.
man.
Like, I was scared for my life, and I do not wanna ever experience that again.
That is so incredible. I think it's also interesting that something you talk in this world, they talk a lot about rock bottom, and it has to be,
Mm,
like, what's the rock bottom gonna be for this person?
yeah,
And it can be, I think I like to think of rock bottoms more, like you said, as a tipping point of, "Okay, this got more the pain was outweighing the pleasure for
yeah.
sure." And I was gonna ask you about that, whether you consider yourself somebody in recovery, or do you just consider yourself somebody who just doesn't use substances? Like, what is
Yeah.
that relationship for you?
Well, I never thought like, I was under the impression, like, you couldn't get addicted to marijuana. Like,
Right.
I really believed that until I looked back now with obviously such a clear mind, and I'm like, "Wait, Matt, I think you were. Like, you were super dependent on it, dude." Like, I would go to the gym, and I would question why I would smoke before the gym, and I'd be like and I would answer myself, and I'd be like, "Well, you feel much more focused."
Oh,
Right? Same thing, I would go out to eat. Well, it gives me more of an appetite, right? Like, all of these things, like, I always had a reply for myself, but at the end of the day, I was like, "Is that necessary for you to live life?" Now I could look back and say that. So, I don't necessarily call myself someone in recovery, I'm just like, "Hey, I will never do that again." Right? And it's very rare that I even drink, like, the rarest of occasions. Not that I ever had an issue with drinking, although I also abused that and very recklessly and dangerously lived my life around that, especially as someone that was in the hospitality industry for as long as I was. But, like, I am very happy being sober. Like, so happy being sober because I'm no longer fearing, like, the feelings that would come up. I think there was a period of time after I actually stopped smoking that I had to feel, like, a lot of crap that was, like, buried,
yeah.
and I was like, that period of time was very rough, but ultimately, yeah, like, I just feel like I'm so happy with just being plain Jane. Like, no, like, just me, like, the way that I am.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's an incredible story. I think it also highlights what we talk about a lot here on Hope Stream, which is there is not one way to quote unquote get sober, right?
Yeah.
So there's, and I try to remind people of this all the time, that the majority of people, 90% of people who struggle with substances, whether it's a dependence or an addiction or whatever it is,
Mhm.
they do not go to treatment. They do
Yeah.
not go to, Hazelton, or they don't go to Karen, or they don't go to wherever. They find a way in their own life, like you did, to make that change, whether that's just an abrupt, like yours sounded like it was a pretty abrupt decision.
Cold
Some
turkey.
people Yeah, for some people, obviously, it's longer, right? And maybe they do an AA or something, but it's just the reason I really wanted to have you talk about your story is that it highlights those 2 points. One, which is a rock bottom doesn't have to look like you're living on the streets shooting heroin. It
Yeah.
can be an example of what you went through, and also that people find sobriety and a great life in a lot of different ways. And
Yeah.
so I just think it's really important, I think, for parents to hear because it can get easy to just tunnel vision, like, this is how it's gonna happen for my child, and
Mhm.
that's not necessarily always true, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think there were numerous times I tried to stop, and I was, like, successful only for a certain period of time. Right? Because not for nothing, like, I was selling weed because I wanted to pay for the dependency of it. Like, it is an expensive addiction, like, it is really freaking expensive,
Yeah.
and granted, I am very fortunate, like, at that period of time, I made a lot of money, I really did, like, late teens, early 20s, I am blessed with the opportunities I had that provided the way that they did, but at the same time, like, there were periods where I'm like, "You know what?" Like, I kind of had those glimpses of what I wanted in the future for my life, and this was interfering with it from, like, a monetary perspective. So I'd be like, "You know what? Like, I'm good. Like, let me I'm done. I'm done with it." And then I would save up so much money, and I'd be like, "Oh, you know what? Like, I could definitely dabble with that still." And then I would go back. So, like, in this particular journey, it really just had to, like, hit me with a 2 by 4 for me to, like, really wake up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's, so helpful for for the people who are listening to just hear a different perspective, to
Yeah.
hear what was, like, rambling through your brain, to make sense of that behavior that you just scratch your head at, like,
Yeah.
"Why? Why is this going on?" So, before we wrap up, I would love to just have you share a little bit about what you do today, your podcast, because I think
Yeah.
your podcast might actually be pretty interesting to some of the kiddos that, are the kids of the parents who are listening.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, just, taking a moment to say thank you to you, Brenda. Like, the work that you're doing, it's so important and it's so powerful. Like, you are really spearheading an initiative, numerous initiatives to, like, change lives. As you and I just discussed, like, the impact that, like, literally an hour ago when we discovered, like, hey, there's a potential trajectory that, substance misuse will literally impact nearly the entire population probably within a few years. Like, that's really, really big. So the work that you're doing is absolutely incredible. And I want to say thank you again.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, as for the podcast, I started it in full transparency, just, like, having nothing to do with my life at a certain point. I had quit a job with Damon John from Shark Tank, and I was like, "Well, I have a Tony Robbins event I'm going to," and then nothing. Sorry, Thanksgiving, and then nothing. So, I started this in 2018, and at the time, gonna be honest, like, didn't have direction or anything, but as you evolve, and you know this, Brenda, as you evolve, your brand evolves. And right now, we are really on a mission to help people feel seen, heard, and connected. Again, those black sheeps that may have not felt that, to transcend societal definitions of success, to define it for themselves by going inward, then outward, versus outward, then inward, which is happening
Mm,
so often. We have really deep conversations that are about exactly what we're talking about here, right? Like, feeling the pain, feeling the emotions, like, navigating all of that, learning how to surf the highs and the lows, the ebbs and the flows, the peaks and the valleys, whatever you want to refer to them as. And in the midst, honestly, having so much fun doing it, it's, like, such a blessing. And I'm sure you could resonate with this too, Brenda. Just, like, having a podcast, it's just, like, such a fun and, like, such a cool endeavor. So I have a blast doing it and I learn so much, literally.
yes, I will second that. I feel like I've gotten a PhD in so
Right?
many things from the people
Yeah.
I've gotten to speak to, and you've had some amazing guests, which is really cool, which I will let people go and investigate your podcast to see who those people are, but thank you so much for being here and just chatting with me and sharing your story. It's so, so incredibly helpful.
I appreciate it. Thank you again for the opportunity. You're crushing it. I love to see it.
Thank you.